Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. What's happening in Pakistan and how should we understand the trauma the country is experiencing? That's the key issue I shall discuss today with one of the country's greatest writers, the author of Taliban and Descent into Chaos, Ahmed Rashid. Ahmed Rashid, let's start with how you view the situation in Pakistan. You've written after Salman Taseer's death and more importantly after the response of lawyers, mullahs and civil society that this has unleashed the mad dogs of hell. We Pakistanis are at the edge of a precipice. That sounds both depressing and serious. Do you really mean it?
Yes, because I think, the crisis we are going through now is far worse than anything we experienced, for example, when East Pakistan separated and became Bangladesh. What I think has shocked Pakistanis has been the reaction of millions of people in support of the killer of Salman Taseer, in sympathy of the killer, people supporting the blasphemy law and refusing to amend it. But I think what has really happened is that there's a series of multiple crises that have all come together. There's an economic crisis, which is of enormous magnitude now. And I mean, there's a global crisis and we are part of that, but there's also a very serious domestic economic crisis. Inflation is running at 15 to 18%. There's acute joblessness. There's no power, nothing. There's a political crisis. This is a coalition government run by the People's Party, but they're in deep trouble with their coalition partners, and the opposition is ganging up. And there's a foreign policy crisis, a lack of relations with India, a lack of relations with, with Afghanistan. Things are very tense. There's terrorism and these extremist groups who the army have not been able to curtail, and there are floods, the result of the floods in the summer.
Let's first concentrate on the response to Salman Taseer's killing. In an article that you wrote for the New York Times, you pointed out that perhaps over 500 lawyers had lined up to defend Qadri, the killer, but Salman Taseer's widow couldn't find even one to prosecute him. You also said that in Lahore, a city of 13 million, not one mullah was prepared to read the funeral prayers. How do you explain that?
Well, I think a lot of Pakistanis, as I said, the government, the army, civil society were taken in complete surprise. And of course, the seeds of this have been apparent to people like myself for a very long time. The fact is that we've had the Pakistani Taliban on our soil, the Afghan Taliban, other extremist groups, and they have laid now they have really penetrated aspects of the middle class, of the educational establishment, of the military, the police. I mean, the fact that he was killed by a policeman.
I mean, you're saying the Taliban has actually infiltrated large swathes of the country?
Well, I wouldn't say the Taliban, but I'd say their kind of thinking. And people want simple explanations for the crisis. People are not prepared to accept complicated explanations as to why they've been made jobless or why they're not getting an education. They want it that this is all America's fault, or this is India's fault, or this is somebody else's fault. People don't want to analyze their own self-made crisis.
Is there a sense in which Pakistani civil society today is cowering or hiding in fear?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say they're cowering. I mean, people have come out. But the point is that civil society is very much on the retreat, I would say. It is very small. It is very frightened. There's no question. There's all sorts of talks about more killings of human rights workers, NGO workers, journalists and others. There is some. But people are coming out and people are resisting. And
except for the fact that critical people have behaved very strangely. Shahbaz Sharif, the Chief Minister of Punjab, his brother Nawaz Sharif, the former Prime Minister, both refused to attend Salman Taseer's funeral, even though he's the governor of their state. To many, that's not just surprising, it's shocking.
It is shocking because a lot of the political parties, frankly, did not respond to this in the way they should have. As you say, not even the People's Party, frankly, wants to raise this issue of why he was killed, how he was killed. They're trying to blame it on some political conspiracy.
Because it's too dangerous to do it personally?
It's too dangerous. People are very scared. Don't forget, there have been attacks on politicians in the frontier in Peshawar by the Pakistani Taliban.
So people are intimidated?
Yeah, people are becoming intimidated, but I think there's going to be resistance.
But one of the most amazing things you wrote about in your New York Times article is that even the all-powerful Pakistani army has refused to issue a single comment of support for the Taseer family. What does that tell you about General Kayani and the top generals?
Well, I think they're very nervous right now. The very fact that, you know, a special police bodyguard killed the governor raises so many questions.
You mean they're scared for their own lives?
Yeah, I mean, what is the mood in the police services now? What is the mood in the army? Is this kind of thinking that this killer expressed, is this kind of thinking now widespread? Now, I'm not saying the Taliban have penetrated there, but this kind of thinking and the need for simple explanations to the crisis that we are facing is what people are looking for.
So there's really a fear amongst top generals that if elite soldiers could kill the governor of Punjab, then maybe elite soldiers could kill army generals as well.
Well, I don't know about that, and I don't know what the mood is within the top generals, but certainly the speculation in the media as to why the army did not issue a public statement of condolence for somebody who is, after all, the representative of the Federation in Punjab. It was not a political position, it was a state position, if you like, I mean, has surprised a lot of people.
And worried them too.
And worried them too, certainly.
I suppose the first critical question people ask, has Pakistan, perhaps without people realizing it, become an extremist and fundamentalist country?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's obviously a very strong minority wing of extremists who have been involved in wars on both sides of our border, who are pushing for an overthrow of the state, who want to bring about some kind of caliphate. And there is a very small liberal part of society which is trying to express itself and trying to make a comeback. But there is a vast silent majority which is not really expressing its views, but which is certainly not extremist, and realizes that, you know, extremism is not an answer to their economic or educational or job problems.
But if the silent majority stays silent, the extremists will end up having their way.
Well, there we have the real problem which Pakistan is faced with, which is the lack of leadership. There is no leadership at the moment coming out of these political parties. There doesn't seem to be much leadership even coming out of the army. Not that we want too much leadership from the army, because we've had enough of military rule, but we certainly want leadership from the politicians.
What about the army itself? Even if the country hasn't become extremist and fundamentalist, many people have been saying for a long time that the Pakistan army is becoming extensively Islamized, and this is a process that's been happening since General Zia's time. Does that worry you?
Well, it certainly worries people, and certainly the last few years for the army having to fight these extremists in the tribal areas, fighting the Pakistani Taliban. They've lost over 2,000 men and officers in this war. I'm sure a lot of people in the army, and this is kind of feedback one gets, are saying, you know, why are we fighting this war? Why are we killing our own people? We should somehow make peace with these people, and this was all a result of the American presence in Afghanistan.
But peace with these people would be peace on their terms.
Well, I agree with you, and of course that was what happened during Musharraf's time. When Musharraf did cut ceasefire deals with these extremists, it was on their terms, and the military and society lost out.
And if that were to happen again, military and society would lose out even more.
Much more, because I think now there is a much stronger influence of these extremists, which now is not just confined to the fringes of Pakistan or the periphery of Pakistan, but is really now affecting the central population area.
So how the army responds and how it overcomes its own internal debate and doubts is a critical test for Pakistan.
Certainly it's a critical test, but I think, you know, what is really called for right now is political leadership. If we don't see that, the army does not want to intervene again. It does not want to take power. It does not want to be responsible for beating back these extremists. After all, this is a political task which has to be taken on by the politicians. People have to be educated and have to be explained as to why the country is going through these crises.
But if the problem is the lack right across the board of political leadership, then the second critical question is this: has the state become so weak that it can't not just defend its citizens, it can't even defend the principles and ideals it stands for?
Well, I mean, there is a real fear that if this crisis is allowed to get worse, if the leadership is not there, that there's a gradual sort of meltdown of the economy, of law and order, of, you know, all the other aspects that the state should be controlling. Then we would be reaching, you know, a very, very serious impasse. And I still think there is a silent majority, there is a liberal elite which wants change.
But time is running out.
But certainly, you know, time is running out.
Let me put this to you. Could it be the case that when we look back, the present civilian regime will simply feel and look like an interregnum, much like Kerensky felt between the Romanovs and the Bolsheviks, or the Weimar Republic between the Kaiser and the Nazis? Are we at that stage in Pakistan?
No, I mean, because, you know, everybody wants democracy to work. I mean, you know, nobody wants the army to come back in again. People want, if it's going to be a coalition government, however weak it might be, they want the process to continue. They want another election. Let democracy be solidified.
Everyone wanted the Weimar Republic to work, and yet it collapsed.
Well, I mean, that's true, but certainly if this government does not get a grip of things, we could go down that road, but I'm hoping with the kind of pressures that there are coming from society and from other parts of the establishment that the leadership will emerge.
In an article that you wrote just 10 days ago for the Globe and Mail in Canada, you suggested that there could be an analogy between the situation in Pakistan today and the situation in Iran when the Shah was falling and Khomeini was taking over. Were you serious?
Well, what I was alluding to was that in Iran, what happened that the institutions of government, the army, the police, the bureaucracy, they failed to stand up to the Khomeinyites, and these institutions collapsed basically. So there was a total vacuum which Khomeini was able to fill.
We're not that far away in Pakistan.
And I fear very much that if we don't get a grip on things quickly in the next year or two, these vacuums are going to be created, which will increasingly be filled by extremism.
So we have just about a year or two.
Well, certainly, I think until the next elections, we want to have another election, but the next elections have to be carried out with some semblance, a greater semblance of law and order than we have today.
Is there a Khomeini-like figure lurking in the wings?
No, I mean, that is perhaps the big difference. I mean, there is no Khomeini in Pakistan.
But he could emerge.
No, that's another big question, because we have acute sectarian problems, Sunni-Shia bloodletting, plus a lot of infighting within the Sunni majority.
That
Sunni.
could be the saving grace.
Well, and that could be the saving grace. But will they, I hope that, no one faction will allow another leader to emerge from another faction.
It's a delicious irony that Pakistan's divisions could actually save it from completely collapsing. Let's take a break at that point. I want to come back and ask, how then does Pakistan pull back from the precipice? You say the country's at the edge. What will stop it from teetering over? That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with Pakistan's great writer, the author of Taliban and Descent into Chaos, Ahmed Rashid. Ahmed Rashid, I want very much to talk about how Pakistan pulls back from the precipice that you say the country is standing at the edge of. But first, a concern that worries people in India, perhaps even more so in the West. In the present state of confusion and chaos, are Pakistan's nuclear weapons safe?
Well, obviously this is of enormous concern in the West. I think for the time being certainly they are. But of course, the killing of Taseer by the policeman does raise questions about the security of these nuclear weapons. But for the time being, as we know, the army is held together. There has never been an internal coup from the mid-level. There has never been any kind of, especially in the last 20 years, any kind of major unrest which would warrant suspicions. But the nuclear establishment, as in India, is enormous. I mean, there are tens and tens of thousands of people who work there.
And so it can be easily infiltrated.
Exactly, and I'm sure the military and the government are taking steps to see that their whole vetting process of individuals and security, I'm sure they're taking steps to see that those vetting processes are working.
But it also follows that if things are going to go wrong, they could go wrong very quickly.
They could go wrong very quickly. I mean, we've seen the result of one assassination. God forbid. I mean, there's talk of more assassinations of leading personalities, politicians, etc. Now, God forbid if something like that happens, then certainly, again, there will be a very serious deterioration.
So this is actually a genuine, serious concern. It's not just a Western concern.
No. I mean, it is a genuine concern, I think. I mean, but as I said, I'm sure that the vetting processes have been put in motion, and I'm sure advice is being sought from outside powers.
Sure,
also.
or you hope?
No, I'm certain that is the process, because we've had indications of that.
Let's come then to how Pakistan pulls back from the edge of the precipice. What is it that needs to be done to ensure that this country doesn't just teeter over?
Well, I think there has to be greater leadership from the government to bring the political parties together to combat this kind of extremism.
But how can there be greater leadership when everyone is questioning the leadership of Asif Zardari and Gilani?
Yeah, but I'm stressing, I think, 2 or 3 factors. One, there's going to be enormous international pressure, and there is already enormous international pressure, and we are extremely vulnerable to international pressure because of our economy, because of Afghanistan and other things.
Second?
Secondly, there is going to be pressure from civil society, and even though it's small, even though it may not be fully articulate, it does have a lot of control in the media, it has a lot of control over NGOs and a lot of the development work. So I think that's the second thing. And thirdly, I think is the silent majority. They have to be mobilized.
But they're silent. That's the problem.
For the time being, they have to be mobilized. Their voice has to be spelled out.
But that's the problem.
Fifth, I think most important is, I think that we have to lay at rest for the time being the kind of foreign policy adventurism that we've been undertaking for so many years. Whether it's in Afghanistan or in Kashmir, we have to focus on our domestic needs.
Will the army be prepared to lay at rest the foreign policy adventurism?
I certainly, I have no idea, but I certainly hope so. It is the crying need of the hour.
But what if the army doesn't change its attitude?
Well, then I think, we are inviting more problems, because, we have to end this kind of diplomatic isolation in the region. We have to lay to rest these issues, and we have to concentrate on the
But do you see the two
domestic
problems? Do you see the two problems? One, what if the army doesn't change its attitude? And number two, what if domestic pressure or international pressure can't change the character of Zardari and Gilani? Those are the two people that rule the country at the moment. They've proved inept and inadequate. Why would pressure succeed in changing their character and their will?
Well, the point is that the economy is going downhill so rapidly that the government is absolutely dependent on the IMF and the World Bank right now, and on foreign aid.
But they just rejected the IMF proposal.
Yeah, well, they've gone back to it now. They're trying to put together a package.
So they're going around in circles.
Well, in a way, but they fully, I think now, post this killing, they realize the importance that if the IMF loan is not there, no foreign investment will come in.
But isn't there a real sense in which you're hoping for a miracle to save the country? The first miracle, a change in the army's attitude. The second miracle, a change in the conviction and will of the President and the Prime Minister.
Look, I think the situation is so dire and so absolutely awful right now.
We have to hope for miracles.
And depressing. It's not a question of miracles. I think, all the various elements in the political spectrum do realize that they have to do something to save the situation.
But absolutely, they all realize they have to do something. None of them seems to be capable of doing it.
Well, we have to give them a little more time, and there is this pressure coming from within. As I said, Pakistanis have to resolve this issue. It can't just be outsiders.
I'm going to quote you what you wrote in the New York Times. There is nobody to save Pakistan except Pakistanis, but if the majority is silent and continues to be silent, it would suggest that even Pakistanis are not prepared to save themselves.
Well, that would be down the road, Karan. At the moment, I think, we are looking to how can we mobilize the silent majority, how can civil society, how can the government
Who's going to do it? Who's going to mobilize them?
Well, as I said, there is a small but very vocal civil society. There is the media, there are various elements that are, positively and hopefully fun. For example, I mean, the day after Salman's death, students were coming out into the streets supporting the killer. The mood has suddenly changed back again. People are now realizing, because what teachers are telling them or because what they're reading in the media, that this was a wrong act, this was a murder.
In a nutshell, Pakistan is standing at the brink. There is hope that it will take steps backwards and save itself, but it could just as easily topple over.
It's a very, very volatile situation right now. It's a very vulnerable situation right now, but certainly the hope is that 170 million people are not going to allow their country to sort of crash inwards. I hope that we will get through this.
Ahmed Rashid, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.